Okay, YouTubers, I have a project that I'm going to try to film. I'm not a videographer, so please forgive me. What we have here is your standard K40. For those of you that are already aware of what it is is supposed to be a 40-watt laser with, I believe, 12 by 8 cutting area. I think in all actuality, all I've got is about 10 by 10. This particular one, actually, from what I found, seems to be of a little bit variety of options based on the control panel that it has. I couldn't really tell you for sure. I know there's some that are definitely got more options here. So this is kind of at the time, kind of a middle of the road. So basically, here's your cutting area, very small, pretty wasteful. When you open this up, you have a power supply, your control panel, and then there is the actual laser control up there. And supposedly they used this to control the laser, obviously, and this was just a standard Cartesian CNC controller. Nothing fancy, nothing to do with lasers, nothing at all. So it didn't allow a whole lot of flexibility. I have thus since upgraded this to a control that will allow me to do PWM, which is a lot better, it seems like, for some engraving applications. Anyway, so a whole lot of dead space in here. I did add an air assist, which, yeah, it was okay. Tried to 3D print something that would attach, but there wasn't a good way to attach on here, and so it would sometimes want to drift, and I ended up catching it on fire. So I'm going to upgrade that. But here's where we come to the couple of the biggest issues. So everyone complains this fan is way underpowered for remove enough air. So I'm going to eliminate that and do something completely different. But here, saving the worst for last. So this is supposed to be a K40, 40-watt laser. Now, I made some notes here so I could get the numbers straight. Your average 40-watt laser is going to be about 700 millimeters long, give or take. 710, 720, depending on the manufacturer. This tube is only 23 inches long, and I did not do the math on that, which is not long enough. A 700 millimeter tube would be 27 and a half. So I'm about 100 millimeters short, which means this is really only a 30-watt tube, brand new, everything working at top form. So I plan to upgrade it, but me being me, I can't just upgrade just a little bit if I'm going to go through the effort. So here's my plan. Well, let's back up. First off, this case measures right about 28 inches. So I could barely get a 40-inch tube in there if I wanted to. Now they do make these extensions that you can add on, which I do plan to use. That adds 13 inches on the side and will get you up to about 1,000 millimeter tube, which would put you at about 50 watts. And I don't know that 50 watts would quite get me enough to cut through 1/4 inch plywood, which is kind of my goal to do as a minimum on this machine. So I think I want to go to the next step, which would put me at about a 1,250 watt tube, or 49.25 inch long tube. So from here to the other end, 49.25. So my plan is to put in a tube or have this case designed in such a way that I have 52 inches to work with. This measures 13 inches. That means I need to come up with, if I take 52 minus the 13, gives me 39, which means I need to come up with an 11 extra inches in this. So tentatively my plan is to cut this thing right down the middle and extend it out, and I'm going to use some 1/4 inch, or not 1/4 inch, angle iron, 1/8 inch by 1 inch, and make kind of an exoskeleton And then on the corners, I will relieve some of the metal, reach in from the other side, and weld it to the exoskeleton, which would probably be a little bit overkill, but I do want it to be pretty well attached and strong. So that's my plan. We'll see how it goes. And I'll just be videoing clips as I go to let you see the progress. Okay, and here's where we come back to the real issues with the way these machines are as sold. So K40, the idea is this was a 40-watt laser. However, a 40-watt laser tube ranges between 700 to 720 millimeters in length. That's about 27.5 inches. This tube measures 23 inches, which then is about 584 millimeters, making only about a 30-watt tube when it's new. And as these things are kind of like light bulbs, and the more you use them, they start to burn out over time. They last quite a while, but they do lose power. So at this point, I don't even know what I'm at, but I'm definitely not pushing out 30, let alone the 40 that this was sold as being able to do. Now, this case is 28 inches, which would give me about a half an inch to spare if I could get a 700 millimeter tube in here. Again, I don't know that that's even enough. They do make extensions, which I plan on using. That adds 13 inches, which will allow you to put in about a 1,000 millimeter tube, which would get you up to about 50 watts. My goal is to be able to cut 1/4-inch plywood with this to make projects with. 50 watts I don't believe will quite get me there. It might. I know 60 is usually what most people prefer to do when they're doing projects like that. So me being me, if I'm going to do the project and try to get myself to where I can do the 1/4-inch, I'm going to go big or go home, as they say. So I want to get a 1250 millimeter tube, which would put me at about 90 watts, which should be more than enough. That's max power. It's probably 80, normal running watts, and you never want to run them at that because it does burn them out faster. So that's part of the problem, is you buy tubes based on them being 40 or 90 or whatever, and you can't ever run them there anyway. So that's part of the reason you kind of have to overbuild it and then hopefully still be able to do what you want to do. So at 1250 millimeters, that puts me at 49.25 inches. That's the tube length. Now, if I want to have a little bit of space to a little space to move, I believe I need to be at probably about 52 inches total length. And this thing measures 13, which puts me at 39 here. Now, I may fudge those numbers a little bit as I get into the finalizing my design process, but that means I need to add 11 inches to this case. So what I plan to do is cut the case in half and then use some angle iron here. It's 1/8 inch by 1 by 1, and make an exoskeleton that I will then frame all of the corners and give me the length, and then I can weld in the extra 11 inches or whatever I end up going with as my final size. So that's the plan. I'm going to bring you along with the journey and see how it goes. Okay, so I plan on doing little video updates. Video updates and then just kind of seeing them together, so hope this doesn't seem too choppy. My plan is to cut the metal with this, just a little 6-inch Harbor Freight special chop saw, abrasive style. I'm going to use the notched corners, not the mitered, so I don't have to move the fence a bunch of times, and I've never done that, so I thought, I'd give it a shot. And my plan is to basically create a frame for both ends, about an 1/8 inch long on either end, maybe just a touch longer, and I can trim it back when I'm doing my final grinding, and have supports in the middle that are notched. So the notched, I can make all the long cuts pretty much just that straight, long, normal, just a touch long, so like an 1/8 inch longer here and 1/8 inch longer there, and then make 2 of them so I can make sure that they fit. And then after that, will pretty much be the moment of truth when I have to decide 100% how long I want to make it and where and how I want to cut it. Again, there are some considerations inside. For example, there's a brace down under here that at first, because I'm not putting the new laser tube in now, nor am I changing any mechanicals now. I would like to lengthen the case and kind of get this back to a semi-functional state all today, if I can. If I have sufficient time, I am considering changing this bar and trying to get some length out of it. Because I do have a specific project that I want to do that I just can't get on this bed. And the length would get me there. But we'll see how it goes. I want to get done what I can today to try and get this from a pretty much functioning machine back to functioning machine, but longer. Alright, so here's another quick little update. Not really difficult, but these little notched corners right here actually take a little bit of time. Way more than if I would have just mitered it, but kind of fun process just to see how it works. Now it's tacked, not tacked onto the machine. It is just removable at this point. But one more of those, and then for the nervous part, time to cut it in half. Alright, and there is side number 2 tacked up. I will probably weld them solid, grind them so they're neat and clean before I do the other ones to eliminate as much grinding on the frame itself that I have to do. Alright guys, here we go. Both ends are fully welded, and I just got this one out of the clamps. I went ahead and clamped it down to my welding table so that it wouldn't warp. And here is the guts, or I should say the case without the guts. So while the first one here was cooling, I gutted it, and now while the other one is cooling, I'm going to clean this up and prep it to paint the interior white, as well as grind off my welds and get them cleaned up. Okay, a couple little side notes. First off, if you notice here, there is a motor here, and there's a gear that's hidden behind there and one on this end with belts that go down underneath each side, which moves this back and forth this way. And then there's another motor right there. If you notice, that moves this way, otherwise known as a Cartesian setup. Your standard X, Y, and then sometimes Z, which this currently doesn't have any sort of a Z setup, which is only used for depth control on these anyway. But in the future, what I would like to do is move this motor and this motor both back here and there to what is called a Core XY. Used quite a bit on 3D printers. All these machines, CNC routers, lasers, 3D printers, they're pretty much all the same type of a setup, same basic ideas. But the Core XY uses both motors at the same time to control movement. It does a couple of things. One, since I've doubled the motors on each movement, that means more power potentially for more precise movements, or at least more rapid and precise. The other thing is, it allows me to tuck the motors up underneath this tray for the laser tube, which means now this thing, if you notice, if I move this forward, they've automatically got it stopped here to keep it from going forward any. So if I look straight down on it, you can see where the laser basically goes right here. There's a good couple of inches that I've lost in space there. Then, the way they set this up, since the motor's dangling out over there, they put this laser mirror over there as well. And there's another good couple of inches that's lost. Versus if I move the laser over here, which there's no reason I can't, and remove the whole motor setup and put it in the back, then this whole assembly can move over that way. So that's an eventual plan. I wanted to make note of it, but I'm not doing it now. if I have time, I'd like to lengthen this by replacing it. But if I don't have time, this may be going back in here. My main goal is just to get this case done today. And then as I have time, I can revisit it. This whole assembly pretty much comes out as just that, an assembly. So, side note, many of you may be wondering, why would I cut this apart since it's a machine that I bought versus just making one out of sheet metal? One, I'm using it as a form. Two, once this laser goes bad, it's nothing more than scrap parts and sheet metal. And with the cost of metal, I bet you I would have more money in the sheet metal to make this than I would just to cut it and use it. Or it'd be about the same. Idea being that, one, I can use this as a form. I can make one. And if I do decide to make more in the future, then maybe I will consider just using sheet metal to fill in these spaces instead of cutting this machine apart. But anyway, just a little tidbit. One more little update. I probably won't film the other side done, but welds are ground and mill scale ground off. Alright, so here's where we're at. I've got these both sanded and primed, and the last one is primed is sitting up, and while I'm doing that, I need to get these out of here. There's one here and one here, and also the old fan mount. I need to get that all out of here and get this cleaned up so I can paint the interior white. Oh, and I need to get this wall out of here too. Of course, that interior gets painted white after I cut it. Okay, so now we've got the case more or less ready. Emptied out. The partition that was here is gone. The housing for the fan is gone. There was some bracketry here that I took out. So now I get to decide where to cut it, and then what I'll do is create a frame that attaches like this. It goes all the way over to there, so this will have to be notched, and then same thing on the bottom to support the whole length, and then I'll have to do a little bit of patchwork in the center. Now I gotta figure out how and where I want to cut it. Alright guys, well, I did a thing. So I got all prepared to cut this, and I just think that it still has some potential. So even though I said it was worth much but sheet metal, and I was going to use it as such, as a basis for my other one, I think I'm going to restore it with this open cavity, because I've seen a few other people do just that. And then maybe have it to where I could sell it or something. But anyway, because really, what I want is this. So yes, I did a thing. Instead of cutting up the sheet metal from the other one, I just made my own panels. And instead of having a hatch on the back for the laser tube, I think I'm just going to have one lid that opens and I can access the tube from the front. So, not exactly what I was planning on having done today. I wanted to have it all painted and ideally had it back together, but since I decided to get a little crazy with doing two instead of just the one, I took a little extra time. But that's where we're at for today. Alright guys, one last shot of what was once a K40, getting ready for paint. As I may have mentioned in one of my last videos, I believe my project took a little bit of a turn, and I've decided that instead of cutting this baby up, that I would actually, now that it has a nice open cabinet, just make use of the full width available and put a little bit bigger laser tube in it, and then use my other one for a really big laser tube. So next time you see this baby, she will be tuxedo black. Here's a couple photos of the finished paint. You can see the metallic in the tuxedo black, and me starting work on the gantry system. Alright, here's a little update on where we're at. We are actually up and running and lightly calibrated to the point where I can actually make cuts. In fact, I'm planning on cutting out a panel to mount this backwards in there so that it can be unscrewed and pulled back out to do anything that needs to be done easily. I need to make an extended bed for it and some sort of a center carrier bearing for this because it wants to kind of bow a little. But those circles over here are actually burns that I did with it, so it is actually working with the longer tube. Of course, there'll be a cover that goes on there and all the wiring needs to be cleaned up, but she is for the most part functional. And here's a couple more shots of the interior as well as the new bed, and then the exterior with everything installed, including the new panel which was cut on this machine, as well as a new analog meter. So if you like this content, please press like and please subscribe for more. As always, thanks for watching.